All right, so welcome to the Safe Section 9 History of Public Housing teaching. Uh, we're really grateful that you joined us tonight. If you can, please drop your name and your development. We want to know where everybody's coming from. We know we're going to be New York City heavy tonight, but Safe Section 9 also does do some work in other cities, and we'll get into that in a moment. If you have friends on Facebook and you want them to join in, because you already get the sense that this is going to be a really awesome event, please go ahead and share with them the link from our Facebook. I will actually share that as well so folks can join.
Hello,
Hi.
hello. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, this is Marcia Jones from Oceanside Development. I'm the secretary on the resident council
Mhm.
and a member of Neighbors Helping Neighbors.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Happy to see you again.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm gonna drop that Facebook link right now, so folks can join and watch our stream. So tonight we're gonna be going over what we call our history of public housing teaching, and we do this teaching as a introduction to folks that are interested in understanding better what is happening in public housing. Safe Section 9 is a tenant-led volunteer organization. We pursue grants and we do other things like get support from elected officials. But for the most part, we just do this because we believe in public housing and want to conserve it for the next generation of Americans, right? So with that being said, I'm going to open up for us our video. When you get our emails, you should be a little familiar with this video. We've used it in the past, but it's really something that we want to make sure that we work with as a tool, right? Because this is something that you'll be able to also share with your neighbors, so that you can reflect on tonight and what we're going to go over tonight. Let me let it load completely, and then I will go ahead and share that so we can get started. In the meantime, I'll go over, who I am. So my name is Ramona Ferreira. That's my colonial name. I prefer to go by Watuke. This music is dope too. So I prefer to go by Watuke, but Ramona is just fine. So Safe Section 9, like I said, is a tenant-led organization. We work nationally on keeping public housing public. And we really focus on making sure that in that fight, we are changing the policies that have created an environment where folks think that privatization is the solution, right? So tonight, we definitely want this to be an interactive session. So if you are able to raise your hand, I'm going to be asking Teresa and Ashley to support me in identifying when folks have questions or comments. And then again, throughout the evening, if you don't get our emails, make sure you get your email to Ashley so that she can add you to our distribution list. All that we ask though is that if you have a desire to express your opinion on something, that you express that opinion respecting the person, right? So you can disagree with an idea, but that shouldn't take away from our appreciation for each other as neighbors and as community members. So with that being said, I am going to be sharing our video. Let me move it to a new window just to make sure it doesn't crash on me. All right, so I'm gonna put it full screen. Technology is great sometimes, but it's also painful. All right, so I'm gonna share that screen. And let me check the waiting room because we have people in there. All right, so go ahead and play, and I'll be pausing us at a couple different moments Here we go.
A lot of people associate public housing with major cities like New York and Chicago, but the United States' 970,000 public housing units are spread out over all 50 states, with 20% located in rural areas. All public housing is paid for under Section 9 of the Housing Act of 1937, which allows the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, to distribute taxpayer funds directly to each city's housing authority. The law's stated purpose was to address, quote, the acute shortage of decent, safe, and sanitary dwellings for families of low income, end quote. Section 9 caps rent at 30% of resident income and gives residents the right to organize into resident councils to determine how many will be spent within their developments. Under Fiorello LaGuardia, NYCHA became the first agency in the US to provide publicly funded housing. Although welfare recipients and people of color were barred from these early developments, years of pressure by housing advocates eventually loosened these restrictions. And by the 1950s, working class Black and Puerto Rican residents had begun to move in. During the fiscal crises of the 1970s, these increasingly diverse developments became targets for budget cuts by politicians pandering to white anger toward the gains of the civil rights movement. Nixon halted all construction of new public housing in 1973. And in 1974, Congress created the Section 8 voucher program to push low-income tenants into the private market. Under the Reagan administration, HUD's budget was slashed even further, from $36 billion in 1980 to $15 billion in 1988. Reagan justified these cuts by stoking resentment towards public housing residents with the myth of the welfare queen, a person of color living lavishly off taxpayer assistance. As this stereotype took root, combined effects of disinvestment and the crack epidemic devastated public housing and the lives of people who lived there. Instead of providing adequate funding, politicians used this crisis as evidence that public housing was an outdated model. With the Hope 6 program, President Clinton proved just as willing as Republican administrations before him to keep up the cruel cycle. Hope 6 provided grants for housing authorities to demolish existing developments, but they were not required to replace them with the same number of low-income units. Between 1993 and 2010, 98,592 units were demolished under Hope 6. Only 12% of those displaced actually moved back into their homes. When the Faircloth Amendment was passed in 1998, it made the number of Section 9 units at that time the absolute limit to the national public housing stock. So today, HUD can't fund any construction of public housing above that 1998 level. Decades of austerity have left NYCHA with $40 billion in unmet capital needs. Residents experience the shortfall every day through shoddy repairs, chronic utility outages, and life-threatening mold and pest infestations. Following a familiar playbook, elected officials and NYCHA CEO Greg Russ now want to use their own neglect of public housing as an excuse to eliminate Section 9 through privatization schemes like RAD and the Blueprint for Change.
Okay. Come out of that.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org.
Y'all can see what my YouTube is like from the next video that plays. I'm a huge fan of PBS and all things that they offer. So let's start the discussion. I'll stop sharing. So what is something that you've learned watching this short video that surprised you?
Hi, it's Brenda. For some reason on this computer, I can't raise my hand, so I'll just put my picture on and go like this.
Okay.
But, well, I kind of knew all that information, and I was glad that Fiorello LaGuardia created public housing, even though it wasn't for all people at the beginning, but that it did open doors for us to come in. And I know I was born in 1957 in Ravenswood Projects, so I don't know what they're talking about in the 1960s. They started allowing Black people in, but I know I was there when I was born, and my sister was too, and she's older than me. But maybe that was the beginning. Maybe we were the pioneers of public housing at that time. So that's something that I didn't know, and that just wanted to mention that. But also that it was a diverse community at one time. Obviously, the whites were moving out, and more Blacks and people of color were moving in. But at that time, it was full families. You know, people, like you said, that were working basic jobs like we still are today. And that's why it's so necessary for us to continue to be able to live in drastically low income housing, because the opportunities are still very dim for many of us.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you. Does anyone have anything else that they want to speak on? Something that surprised you? Something that you learned that was new in the video?
Yeah, my hand is raised on, okay, the video's not starting.
Somebody from 2576 is unmuted. Maybe they want to speak.
Okay, so let's
The
let
phone number?
Margaret go. We're gonna go ahead and let Margaret go. Thank you, Teresa, and then we'll go to the phone number.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah, the one I appreciated the information that in 1980 something, that where they was, they gave 85 mil, was $1 billion, right?
The budget.
And that's, you know, that's a shame from that to what little bit that we get now, because it's like, you know, that's a big drop. So it's like you really wanted us to fail. And with the thing with the welfare queen, it just, he brainwashed a whole society, even some Black people, to look at NYCHA residents as they're like the lowest of the low. And everybody's trying to get over, everybody's trying to do whatever. And that stigma continues to stay with us, even though we might be paying less, I mean, more rent than some Mishalamas, some co-op people, some whatevers they are, rent control, rent stabilization.
Rent stabilized, right.
Yeah, and we're the ones that's getting like the, you know, and the stigma is so hard to get rid of. It's so hard, you know, and Reagan did a good job of messing us up with that. When he was the one, the welfare queens and kings was those corporate people, not us.
Yeah, so I really want to hone in on what Margaret just raised, two like really important points, right? The first one is they wanted public housing to fail, right? So by the time that Reagan came around, they started making decisions about the budget that guaranteed that public housing would fall apart. They've done the same thing with public schools, right? We always hear there's not enough money for public housing, there's not enough money for schools, but here in New York City, we're buying robots. So it really is something that we can't ignore, that a lot of the decisions that policymakers are making, right? So this is Congress. Congress is deciding that they're not going to invest in public housing. And that is why we focus on lobbying at the congressional level, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that later. Then I want to go back to the point regarding the welfare queen. The welfare queen, like Margaret just pointed out, is the legacy that was presented to us, right? Like we live with the legacy of who she was. And one of the things that is really difficult for folks that are fighting for public housing is how do we overcome that, right? How do we change people's minds? And the way that we lobby, the way that we present ourselves, our video, our playlist, our conscious choices that the Safe Section 9 Coalition is making to ensure that for us, when we walk into a room, we are not paying for the assumptions and the racist ideas that people have about folks in public housing. because the welfare queen is not the standard, right? How many of you, either you can raise your hand or drop, let's say drop the X in the chat. How many of you remember hearing about the welfare queen? Okay, I'm seeing some hands. Yeah. So for a certain generation, the story of the welfare queen was like this really fascinating thing. This woman, she was from Chicago and she was a professional criminal. She had 80 names, she had 30 addresses, 12 social security cards, and she was collecting everything from veterans benefits to Medicaid and food stamps for children that didn't exist. So she was actually making about $150,000 a year tax-free because she was a scam artist. But Linda Taylor is not us, right? She was one person and she was used in propaganda. You know, in America, they talk a lot about propaganda and like how, you know, other governments, specifically like China, right? They have all this propaganda, and Russia has propaganda. Propaganda is democratic. Every country uses it, right? And here they started using her as propaganda to make public housing undesirable. Right? So she was used to vilify specifically Black women. And she started changing her stories, changing how much we were actually receiving for public housing. So that's something that we're going to have to continue to fight against, right? So let me go now to the phone number 2576. If you want to go ahead and share, what did you find interesting in that video? Or any reflections that come to mind after watching that video. And if you don't want to speak, that's also fine. We just want to make sure we're not missing folks that are on the phone. And then I'm seeing Danielette Horton. Let me go ahead and unmute you. You can go ahead and share.
Okay, I just wanted to say that most corporations and high-income families do get welfare, but the focus is not on them. Housing is a human right issue, and we shouldn't accept the stigma of low income and the housing that we're supposed to get that we don't get. We as taxpayers are due this. This is our right. So when they be talking about low income and, you know, public, you welfare queen and all of that stuff, the corporations and those high income families, they get more welfare than we do. I just want to make that clear.
Yep, that's a really good point. You're absolutely correct. You know, when we look at the Congress, right? So right now, the New York City, New York State budget is being argued over. And there's certain things that are supposed to be a part of this budget that should reflect, you know, who we are as a state. But it's not, it hasn't been delivered on time because people are arguing with the governor over really important basic human rights. You know, like how much money are we going to give to our schools? Why aren't you funding NYCHA again? Why aren't you supporting public housing and public education? Why do you want to continue to raise the cap on charters, which is a huge welfare system for the wealthy, right? They're basically using our kids in charter schools as tax breaks. So, I mean, that's such a great comment, and it's an important one because when we think of welfare in America, we only think of people of color primarily, when we know that that's not the truth, right? So it's important when we start this conversation to understand first the history of public housing, and then what is the stigma that surrounds it, right? What is causing folks to make these policy decisions? And then from there, we go to changing policy, right? So the next thing we're going to talk about is once they create the crisis, how do they actually try to fix it, right? So they created a crisis by not funding public housing. And during the Obama years, things had really started getting to the point where public housing was falling apart. You know, this is the point where things are like turning critical. So they talk in the video about the creation of project-based Section 8. So before we keep talking, I really want to make sure that we go over the different sections, because one of the things that this coalition likes to do is to make sure that folks are understanding the policies and the ideas that we're actually going to tackle, right? So Section 8, or traditional Section 8, is something that I grew up under. You know, my mom received a voucher. The voucher was something that we went, you know, we walked around with, we went to see supers, we would like knock on doors and see, you know, if they had an apartment available and if they took Section 8. Then there's this project-based Section 8, which is the one that the video focuses on. The project-based Section 8 is what was created under the Obama administration, right? Throughout the country, they call it RAD. So R-A-D. And then here in New York, once that name stopped being sexy, they started calling it PACT, P-A-C-T. Regardless of what name we're using in different cities, what that service is like is your project is taken and it's given over to a private management company. Now, Section 8 is involved because Section 8 is still getting funding, right? So we saw in the video that they're giving a lot of money to Section 8 because that's going into the private market. How do you guys think that decision is being made? Why are we putting money into the hands of private corporations, right? Like, why did we change from funding public housing directly? And why did we suddenly start thinking about giving money to private landlords?
We,
Go ahead, Brenda.
yeah, I was going to say we, but it's the greed. I believe that it's the greed of the powers that be, the non-caring, the systemic racism.
Perfect.
So
What do you
forth and
think it
so
is,
on.
Teresa?
I think the lack thereof, like they don't really there's no accountability when it's private, because if you become private, then, you know, if there's no accountability to say if you don't do something, then, you know, it won't get taken care of. So that's
Okay.
one of the things that, you know, with them, no accountability.
That's a good point. You know, sometimes when these companies get these contracts, it's
Mhm.
not like the company's better than NYCHA, right?
Right.
You know that CNC, Wavecrest, and other companies have been found to be slumlords.
Right. So, and then on that, it's like they can hire anyone to say, you know, like that's their family or whatever. And, you know, there's no accountability because, oh, I just paid my, you know, my brother, but whether my brother fixes it or not, there's NYCHA with us staying in safe Section 9. We have the accountability that with HUD and all that connected. So there's none of that once they become privatized. So that's
Okay.
or
So
why I
let's
said
talk a little bit more about why Congress is making the decision to give money to the private sector. And I see Margaret has her hand up.
Before I make my statement, I have to kind of respectfully disagree with the accountability, because I'm living in NYCHA. I don't see no accountability here
That's a good point.
at all.
You're correct. Yep. Teresa's correct and you're correct, right? And that's
Yeah.
that's one of the things that we also like to focus on, right? So we like to tell people we're not fighting for NYCHA. We're fighting for public housing, right? And let's explain what that means. So we are fighting for the legislation that is Section 9. So the coalition is Neighbors Helping Neighbors, Justice for All, Not One More Block, Sunrise NYC, so Sunrise National, Residents to Preserve Public Housing. We're not in the business of supporting NYCHA. NYCHA has demonstrated that they can't manage things, that they misappropriate funding, that they don't spend funding, right? And that they are criminal. But the policy that is Section 9, right? That congressional law is almost perfect. Is there room for improvement? Yes. But if they were upholding the law that is Section 9, we wouldn't have the issues that we have. The problem is HUD has decided that they're no longer in the business of upholding or maintaining or expanding public housing. So they've allowed housing authorities, and it's not just New York City, right? We're seeing this in little towns in Arizona, in little towns in Ohio. The housing authorities are all failing, but it's because they're making a conscious decision to no longer focus on properly managing things and upholding Section 9, right? Because there's no money in that. So go ahead, Margaret. I know you had a second point.
The second point is they want to switch the money into the hands of the wealthy.
Yes, yes.
You know, that's all there is to it, because they see that they saw with their own eyes that they can make money, and this is what they're working on. Because even when I was on welfare, I had lost my job. They sent me to a job agency that would help me look for a job called Curtis and Mayfield, and they had rented a whole floor with fax machines, director, and everything like that to help us look for a job, even if it was a McDonald's job, and I was a college degree. They wanted, because they get some more stipend, and then they showed us a video. Curtis and Mayfield didn't even live in New York.
That
So
is
they're making money, you know, and they're not even living in New York because they want to change all the, like earlier, the welfare queen is them, and they get thousands and really millions of dollars running a shelter system.
yes.
You can't get nobody to stop the shelter system because these people are making money.
Yes.
So now they want to make money through the public housing by making sure that you know, the state doesn't recycle the money, but it just goes into their pocket.
Exactly. They're taking the money out of the public system, right? So this is called the nonprofit industrial complex. So what ends up happening is you have people that will open up, like Margaret just mentioned, a shelter. Are shelters really trying to end homelessness?
Huh?
Not at all, right? We'll open up places where a company like Fresh Direct can go and dump a bunch of leftover food, right? We'll have food banks that pop up. Are they trying to end hunger? No. Because when the fight comes up for a livable wage, right, for $15, which is still not livable in New York, these companies don't support that. Because if people were making a livable wage and people could afford their rents and could afford their food, you wouldn't need shelters and you wouldn't need food banks, right? So public housing is like the Taj Mahal when it comes to what privatization is after. Once they get their hands on public housing, there are billions of dollars to be made. And that money will never support the actual tenants. And that money is primarily being used to enrich these companies, right? So it's important for us to understand that Congress is making this choice because these companies are coming together and they're lobbying, right? When I got to talk to the man that ran HUD under President Obama, I asked him, why is it that public housing continues to not get funded, right? Why aren't we getting the money that we need? When everybody has done the studies, right? We know what the problem is. Why don't we get the money? And his answer made me laugh because he said, you don't go to DC, right? And I remember turning around at the time I was working with Community Voices Heard, not working, volunteering. And I turned around and I looked at the organizer and I was like, dude, why are you wasting my time? Because I had been saying that the minute I joined Community Voices Heard, it's why I ended up leaving. I said, we need to be going to DC. We are not visible in DC. And it's not DC to go see the national parks, it's DC to go fight at the Congress level, right? If we are not going down there and if we're not asking for money for this issue, if we're not telling them what we want, we're not going to get it. But there are major groups all across America of private companies that are invested in privatizing public housing, and they're down there all the time, buying people lunch, making donations, holding meetings. So our voice is not being heard, right? So 3 years ago, I was like, screw this. If no one else wants to go to DC, then I'm going to start planning how I'm going to get there. And that's how we got to this point of creating national solutions and the things we're going to talk about tonight, right? But thank you for that really, really good discussion on that. So the project.
Excuse me, Ms. Ramona,
Yes.
do you want to ask anyone that's on the phone if they want to ask any questions? Because we only if they are mute, then we can ask them.
Okay, yeah. If folks on mute, we'll go to you if you're on the phone, because we know you're not able to raise your hand. So we can definitely Robert is helping to monitor the attendees, and he'll pay attention to that because I'm looking at like 7 screens. Thank you, Teresa. Teresa's always aware that I lose focus. So the project-based Section 8, right? A couple things I want us to know before we move on. With project-based Section 8, let's say, you know, we used to get a voucher, right? So you would get a voucher back in the days, and you would get this document, and my mom would like run around with me, because I spoke English well, to actually talk to the supers, right? And she'd be like, look, I have a voucher. This is how much money, you know, I can get. This is the maximum amount of rent. These are the rooms that I need. Do you have an apartment? So that's traditional Section 8. Project-based Section 8, this voucher is never given to you. Instead, the voucher is handed over to the management company, and it's issued for your unit. So instead of it saying this Section 8 voucher entitles Ramona to an apartment, it says this Section 8 voucher is going to support the rent for this specific apartment. So you're no longer a part of the discussion. You're no longer a part of the contracts. When you look at a RAD or PAC lease, or the agreement that NYCHA is signing, or your housing authority in different cities is signing, the tenant is never a part of that decision. So it's important for you to know that this rent will be covering the apartment, but it's not connected to you as an individual, right? Now, Section 9 is traditional public housing. Like the video shows, this is public housing. This is where our rent is capped at 30%. This is where the portion of your rent continues to be subsidized by public monies, and there's a housing authority. Now, a lot of times we'll hear housing authorities telling you, no, you know, it's still gonna be public because our housing authority is gonna still do it. That's a lie. Anytime that a housing authority shifts control over the units away from them as a housing authority, right? So what NYCHA is trying to do in New York is they're trying to take the units, 25,000 units to begin. They're trying to take that out of our pocket of public housing and give it to something called the trust. The trust is not a housing authority. It's not recognized by HUD. It will not be Section 9. It will not receive Section 9 funding, and it doesn't have Section 9 programming. So that separation is privatization. It's important to know that difference, right? And the last section that I want to highlight is Section 18. Now, Section 18 is what they're using in many cities to get rid of public housing. With Section 18, you can either demolish or dissolve public housing. So what does that look like, right? Because I want everyone to be able to see it and recognize it. You think of Cabrini houses in Chicago being exploded, that is Section 18, demolish, right? That's a demolition. If you look at Section 18 demolitions, they get rid of the physical building. When you think about dissolve simply means that it's deleted from the master list that HUD has. So there's like a list somewhere in a computer that says Section 9. Dissolve means that they're gonna go over where, you know, they're gonna find the name of your development. I'm at Mitchell Houses in the South Bronx. That's where I live. They're gonna find Mitchell, they're gonna hit delete. It's dissolved. And then it's handed over to a private management company. In order to get Section 18, HUD has to do something. And this is the first vocabulary word that I want us to be able to remember, right? Because I know you're going to tell people tomorrow, I spent last night talking about public housing and it was the dopest event ever. And this is what I learned. So this is important to remember, obsolete. Obsolete, according to HUD, means that your apartment is no longer safe for you to live in. That your rights, your human right to live with dignity is being violated, right? So how many of us live in an apartment right now that violate our human rights? I mean, everybody needs to be raising their hands because we all have hot water issues. We all have heat issues. We all have non-working elevators. We all have cabinets that are not being maintained. I've got cracks in my ceiling. I have no tiles. That is section 18, right? Does someone have a question about that?
You got roaches and mice still?
You said roaches and mice.
Roaches and mice,
Mice
yes.
too, yeah.
Yes, that is a huge issue in public housing.
Mold.
Mold, yes, right?
Rats.
So when we come into our meetings,
Yes, I
always
believe
tell
that's
people,
rot by the door in my room door.
yes, rotted walls, mold, lead, non-working elevators. None of us is unique in public housing. The people in Ohio, in Akron, Ohio, are having the same issues. Same exact issues. So this is a choice that's being made again, and I'll go to Brenda next. This is a choice that's being made again, right? This is not by mistake. So the first thing that they're not doing by mistake is they're making sure that the money goes to the private sector, right? Margaret helped us talk about how do we transfer the wealth? Instead of recycling the money into public housing, they're choosing to take it out and send it to the private sector. That's the first thing that they're doing on purpose. The second thing that they're allowing to happen by design is they're allowing our apartments to fall apart. Because once they get the designation of obsolete, they can dissolve it or they can demolish it. So oftentimes tenants will ask me, well, how do they know how bad things are? How do you guys think how do they figure out how bad our apartments are? And we're talking about HUD, right? How does HUD know how bad things are in each of our public housing developments?
By the 707 number that I'm calling.
Okay.
Kimberly, I saw Kimberly, she was about to say something. Go ahead, Kimberly.
I was about to say something.
Oh,
I was
Daniela too?
gonna say that same thing by the ticket numbers that we made.
Yes. Is that what you were gonna say, Daniela?
No, I was saying HUD don't know what's going on because they don't inspect. They come and inspect once a year and they do this surface checking, you know?
And they only go to the apartments that are nice, right? Because
Yes, yeah, they
knows where
pick
to
the
take them.
apartments they want to go to. They don't just come and
So
do that.
that's interesting, right? You have to pay attention to these things.
Mhm.
HUD comes out, Daniela is telling us they only go to certain apartments. They always take them to the same units because these units look great, right? So these units make NYCHA look like NYCHA's doing its work. But then when NYCHA turns around and says, hey, we want to do Section 18 under the trust, they pull out the record of complaints. They look at our tickets. Our tickets are a testament to being designated obsolete. That's the information they're using. Go ahead, Brenda.
Okay, but I have another question. But you just said Section 18 under the trust.
Yes.
What do you mean by Section 18 under the trust?
Yeah, so we're gonna go over the flyer and I'm gonna go over the designation of Section 18 a little bit more because we have that vote coming up in New York. But basically the trust, the way that it's being introduced and the law that was written for it states that folks can actually be designated as obsolete. And
Under the trust.
only once you get designated as obsolete can you get what's called a tenant protection voucher. The tenant protection voucher is the local name for Section 18 money.
And that's what the trust is. That's what one of our programs that we're voting on.
Yes.
So you're saying that Section 18 is the trust?
Exactly, it is.
Okay, all right. Now, you said something about RAD. You said that RAD impact under Section 8, that the voucher is unit-based, because I know that in Ocean Bay, it's RAD right now. And from the PowerPoint presentations, they said that these people under RAD right now have the voucher. It's not project-based, it's not unit-based, but they can take the voucher and go anywhere within the United States and Puerto Rico with these vouchers. So you're saying that's a blatant falsehood, that's a lie.
That's a lie.
So
The other
did
people
they
are here
change
are not
something?
exactly right.
Was something changed, or was it always that way?
So it's always been the way, right? So how does NYCHA get to make the statement and then say, no, I wasn't lying? Let's explain how they did that, right? So project-based Section 8 tenants can be put on the Section 8 waiting list. So they can go to their management, they can go to Wavecrest, they can go to CNC. I'm not sure who's out in the Rockaways, but they can go in the office and they can say Wavecrest. So they can say, I want to get a transfer. Put me on the list. But is the Section 8 list open in New York City? No.
It was, but
So it opened for like a month and they had like 70% more applicants than they expected, right?
yeah.
So there's no Section 8 voucher. Now, what can happen is the person can be put on a wait list to wait for Section 8 to open. But we had something that we had a tenant come into a teach-in, and in that teach-in, she was like, yeah, I've been part of RAD for 7 years. I'm still waiting for my transfer. So she's been waiting 7 years for her transfer certificate and voucher to come through under her name for Section 8. So it's not like NYCHA has like a hookup and they can make sure that you get to skip the line. You're put on the wait list.
Yeah, I don't, I'm just a little confused about that, because it's in writing that along with this RAD program that you are given this voucher, and after being under RAD for a year, you can utilize that voucher. And they made it seem like it was going to be available 1, 2, 3. But thank you for confirming that.
That's a complete lie. And then I'll go to, I see Robert and then I see Christina. So we have some lawyers that reviewed the legislation for the trust. And some of the issues that they raised were, that's a lie, right? The tenant is not going to get that honored. So you can, after a year of living under Wavecrest, you can say, hey, I want to transfer, I want my Section 8 voucher, I want to move to North Carolina, right? You can go and ask for that and they can put you on a list, but you're just going to sit on that list. So it's not that they're lying, it's just that it's never materializing, right? It's never going to happen because it's not open. And Section 8 depends on that, right? And then going back to the Section 18, I want to make sure we also clarify that, right? So the trust itself is written and passed up in New York State. That law is the one we're going to be voting on this summer. And they're going to be going to like 25,000 different developments, and they're going to 25,000 units, sorry, 25,000 units are going to be asked to vote on this. You're going to be voting on 3 options, and we'll show you the flyer that we have, and I'll drop it in the chat too. So you guys can download it and save it. But the Section 18 option, they're calling it the trust. Now, because they're not doing this under RAD and PAC, what they had to do was ask for a different pocket of money. So we talked about project-based Section 8. Under project-based Section 8, there's a little category on the side that's called tenant protection vouchers. Now let's pull apart that word, right? Tenant protection voucher. What do you think the voucher is protecting you from? It's your apartment. Because let's rewind, right?
Moving.
that in order for you to get Section 18, your apartment has to be in such a bad condition that it's a risk to your health, mental, physical, and emotional, right? And we all shared all the same issues that we're living with. So once that voucher is issued, it's only being issued because your apartment is a threat to you. So you are being protected by this tenant voucher. Okay, give me 1 second, Marissa. You're being protected by this voucher from the home that is falling apart because of the racism, because of the welfare queen myth, and because Congress decided to start giving money to the private sector. Does that make sense now? Do you guys see how that's happening? We'll go over a little bit. So I'm gonna go, Robert, I have Robert, Christina, and then I have Marissa. Go ahead, Robert.
Oh, yeah, hi. I had a quick comment and then I wanted to share what Vernell said, if that's okay with her. I just wanted to mention another reason why we were in the situation we're in is because of a court case called Citizens United, which was a decision that reversed centuries-old campaign finance restrictions and enabled corporations and other outside groups to spend unlimited funds on elections. So that's one reason that we're in this state, and that the corporations have this sort of power over Congress. The private sector has this power over Congress. They allowed it to happen, basically. And then, Vernell, if you don't mind me sharing your comment, is that okay?
Yes, then.
Okay, I thought it was very good. Vernell says we first.
Ooh. Robert, you're muted.
Oh, sorry
Okay,
about that.
so read that again.
Vernell says we first must get the attention and support from our congressional members, which Safe Section 9 is doing. And she mentions in Rockaway is Gregory Meeks. And he has denied meetings with herself and other tenants, and no other group in the community is pushing him to support Section 9. So he is good with dividing and conquering to continue having his way and ignoring our needs. And I thought that was very important to mention.
Thank you for that. So then I have Christina.
Can I say something to that, what he just said?
Oh, to Meeks? Yeah.
Yeah, to Mix and all of our elected officials and the city council on the housing committee, we should be holding them accountable and asking for the agenda on what they have on public housing. Those are the people we should be holding accountable. And residents also should get more involved in trying to ask questions and challenge things and make phone calls. We're busy working 2-3 jobs. We don't have time. This is why they're doing what they're doing. We need to get more involved and we need to hold them more accountable.
Yes.
Yes, that's watching us.
We'll talk a little bit about that, how we're going to hold them accountable. Thank you for that. So then I'm going to go to Christina, and then after Christina, I know I have the other young lady. Go ahead, Christina.
I mean, I don't want to take up too much time. I just wanted to clarify that Section 18 is part of the public housing law. And so it's been a tool for other cities and states to essentially what they call disposition or dispose of, which is essentially selling the units and demolition. However, for a lot of cities, they've chose demolition under Section 18, which is what we've seen and why we're so concerned, because as Ramona said, once it's considered obsolete, it's then eligible for demolition, which is why we're so concerned, because it's not like this happened overnight and by accident. This was what we call planned obsolescence, kind of like phones, right? It's like
Yeah.
they want you to get the new one. It's created for itself to die.
Yeah, so remember,
Um,
guys, we said for demolition, we said think about Chicago, right? Demolition should bring Chicago to your mind. What happened in Cabrini Greens? Go ahead, Christina.
I mean, I'm pretty much done, but I guess the reason why it hasn't been successful before, I think, is because New York state law is what protected New York City from experiencing the complete like privatization of public housing and or demolition. And that's why the NYCHA Preservation Trust is what changes the game, because it modifies New York state law, which is what protected us prior. I just wanted to clarify that, because Section 19's been there. It's not like the Preservation Trust has that's the fine line, is that it's changed New York state law. I'm gonna shut up now.
All right, and then I know we have, let me see, we had someone on
I think it was Marisa. Marissa.
Yeah,
I don't know if I'm saying your name right.
Marisa, can you unmute? There you go.
Yeah, I have a question. What's gonna happen to the people that's on a waiting list for like a 2-bedroom or 3 bedrooms and their apartment is really bad?
That's a really good question, right? So you're talking about, I want to clarify, is it what's going to happen to the folks that are currently living in public housing? So like if
Yeah,
it goes private. Okay,
because
so
I put in for my 2-bedroom, but they said my apartment is supposed to be not livable for nobody, because whoever did the electricity, what happened was they messed it up, and the light switch from the kitchen and the outlet was connected to the one in the hallway and also the bathroom. Everything was connected. So one more day in the house and we would have turned the switch, we would have been.
Yeah. So those are
calling
scary
nutritionists,
situations,
and I
right?
keep putting repairs in here, and I'm tired of putting in repairs.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit, because this is something that comes up a lot, right? So let's say that you're living out in, I'm gonna pick a development, Mott Haven Houses, which is next to me. So Mott Haven Houses, if they go under RAD or PAC, if you're on the wait list or a transfer based on domestic violence, harassment, assault, a need for a bigger unit, right? Or a smaller unit. If there are repairs that need to be made in your home and they can't be done with you in it. Once you are under the private management company, you lose whatever status you had in public housing, right? So the private management company has to make a decision about your case. So if Wavecrest Management takes over and they have a lot of units in other places, they can say, hey, we'll offer you that transfer, but they do not legally have to do this. So one of the other issues with the trust, right, that was that bill that we're talking about, this new program that started up in Albany, one of the issues that the lawyer identified with that is if you're waiting for a domestic violence transfer, you might not be able to get that transfer honored if your management company doesn't feel like it. There's no legal reason why they have to do that, right? And I would love to think that everybody has our values, right? And that everybody cares about other people, but that's really not the way that corporations move. A housing authority has to honor your transfer, has to move you within a certain time, right? Now, is this happening 100% of the time with your housing authority right now? No. Your housing authority is a hot mess right now, right? We're trying to fix that. So what happens is, though, the management company that you get, that private management company, they're going to make all the decisions. And you might not get the apartment that you need. You might not be changed somewhere out to somewhere else because of security reasons. So it puts tenants in the limbo, because like I said before, when they sign the lease, if you guys pull out your lease tomorrow, take a look at it. There are paragraphs that come directly from Congress in your current lease with your housing authority. Once you go to a private management company, all of that is lost. all of the protections, all of the rights, your rent being capped, you getting transfers, us having support systems. You know, one of the things we saw recently was out in Yonkers, the housing authority president there, she actually wrote an op-ed saying, you know, I thought that it was the right thing to do. We went rad, we're now private. We've been able to fix things, but it hasn't fixed the community, right? We still have people that need support. We still have people that need resident engagement. We still have people that need opportunities. Like I was telling my homemate today, her son is like, oh, you know, he's interested in taking a class to get a job. I'm like, he can take that class for free because we live in a housing authority, because we live in public housing. You know, one of the things we forget is all the benefits that we have, right? That's what we're fighting for, because the law guarantees those benefits. So if you are changing hands between Section 9 public housing and a private company, you will not get those. They're saying that the trust has all of these rights built in. They're saying that the trust is going to honor them. If NYCHA didn't honor these when Congress was supposed to be monitoring them and HUD was supposed to be doing inspections, why in the hell would they monitor them when nobody's watching? When it's all about the money? That's why evictions go up, right? So I'm gonna go to Sneha because I've seen she's had her hand up for a little bit.
And then I think Brenda, I saw your hand up too, but I wanted to ask for the obsolescence thing that you spoke about under Section 18 and the trust, like how is that decided? Like how is that decided about an apartment or someone's home?
So how is HUD making the decision, or how
whoever is making the decision, I guess HUD, like, do they come look at the units? How do they decide?
Okay, so
do we know that yet?
Yeah, so the process, the way that the law explains it is, the process is that the housing authority will ask, they'll put in an application for Section 18. So they will ask HUD to consider issuing a Section 18 designation to that development or to a certain amount of units, right? So NYCHA has to put in an application from NYCHA to HUD saying, we are a hot mess. You need to put us under Section 18. And then there's a discussion in the application as to whether or not they're going to demolish, right? So remember Cabrini Greens blowing up, or are they going to dissolve, which is handing it over to a private management corporation. Now, the current law doesn't ask tenants if they want to be a part of that conversation. So our national solutions, which we're going to talk about too, actually are asking that the law be amended, right? So we want to amend the law at the Congress level so that when tenants are facing Section 18, like we are in New York, like they are in Minneapolis and other cities, that we are asked if we want to be Section 18. Because right now the Housing Authority and HUD are making the decision in private. And that's dangerous, right? Because when a development goes rat or pack, are they asking tenants? No. They're usually asking the resident association. And one of the things that NYCHA loves to do in New York and that they've done down in Minneapolis is that they'll go in and they'll talk to the resident association and they'll tell the resident association, you know, it's going to be great. It's going to be this, it's going to be that. And the resident association oftentimes is, you know, it's people that live with us. And they're like, I'm tired. I'm tired of like not knowing if I'm going to have hot water and heat. I'm tired of like one of my elevators breaking down every day. I'm tired. But what the resident association is not hearing is all of the dangers that come with Section 18, right? All of the things that you're losing, all of the research, right? The research study that was done by Neighbors Helping Neighbors, by Human Rights Watch. All of these tell us that once we go private, and once Section 18 happens, the tenant doesn't win. Things don't get better. The repairs aren't faster. the quality doesn't improve, our rents go up, and the evictions go up, right? So the conversation about Section 18 does not include tenants. Now, go ahead, Brenda.
Wow. Okay, I'm glad I'm getting all this clarity. So are you saying, no, first of all, okay, now we got rad impact. And I know that all three of these voting targets, or four, the rad pact and the trust. Are you saying that the trust is even worse than rad impact?
Yep.
That's my first question. Yes? And now, are you saying that when they come and they give us that PowerPoint demonstration about the four choices, or the rad pact, the trust, and Section 9, three choices, right? Are you saying that if we vote for the trust, it doesn't automatically go into Section 18? What you're saying is that if a development votes for the trust, and if NYCHA or HUD feels that it can go, that it's eligible to go under Section 18, that's what they'll try to pull if you vote for the trust? So you don't know that you're voting, a resident would know they're voting for the trust under section, with a possibility of it becoming a Section 18.
Yeah, so let's talk about Fulton Housings. This is a perfect example.
Lord have mercy.
For real, right? So when I do teach-ins, I like to tell people, we now know from the research from Neighbors Helping Neighbors and from Human Rights Watch that all those things go bad, right? I mentioned them. And no improvement in repairs, no improvement in quality of life, increased evictions, and financial pressures on the tenant, right? All this is happening the minute that RAD comes in. So Fulton Houses down in Lower Manhattan, there was a really passionate tenant there. And she started hearing that they wanted to go in and they wanted to do RAD or PAC. And she took it upon herself. She wrote a petition by hand. She knocked on all the doors. She got 96% of the signatures from the head of households, right? She came to us. She went to Residents to Preserve Public Housing. We all supported her. You know, she was like, oh my God, I knew it. I knew this was going to be bad. So she went out there and she did the door knocking. She got the signatures. HUD, NYCHA, and her elected officials ignored it. The mayor put together, this is de Blasio, right? This was a couple years ago, put together this committee because they love a committee. Every time I'm trying to fix something, people are like, we should make a committee. I'm like, get out my face with these committees. I don't got time for any more committees. So this committee comes together and there are people in this committee from the government side, the resident association is there. They slowly silence the opposition, right? Now, how does the opposition get silenced? Let's think about that for a little bit. Who lives in public housing? We have 40% of us that are over the age of 62, right? So seniors. We have like 30% of us that are 25%, 20 to 25 of us that are disabled, like myself. Then we have working families. These are the three main categories. So usually when you have meetings, this is why the seniors show up. Because there's a lot of seniors and they're like, look, I'm retired. I'm trying to be active. I'm trying to stay sharp. And I got the time. You rarely see the working families in the room, right? Because if you're getting, I mean, this meeting's at 7 o'clock on a Wednesday. So shout out to you. If you're coming home from work, you have kids, you have to cook a meal, you have to get ready for bed. You're trying to take a bath and like really find your armpit, but you're too tired. Like it's a lot. So it's hard for our community to come together because of all the things we're already taking care of, right? So it's easy to silence the opposition. So Jackie kept fighting, kept fighting, kept fighting. She was ignored. They took a vote, right? An internal vote. They decided to go towards RAD and PAC. That was 2 years ago, Vanessa? Right now, there's news articles. If you Google Fulton Houses, you'll see that there are some news articles that right now Fulton Houses is being told that they have to go Section 18. So that's exactly what Brenda just explained. They came in, a management company took it on. I don't even know who it was. Might have been Wavecrest. They said, you know, we're going to go in, we're going to come in, we're going to rehab the apartments. You guys are going to get all this new stuff. It's going to be great. We might even throw ponies in. And then they did the assessment once they actually took over. And now they're like, you know what? Doing all of that stuff we talked about, it turns out that ponies are really expensive and we can't afford it. So the only way that we can do it under the budget that we set for our contracts is if we Section 18 and demolish Fulton Houses. So that's a demolish, right? So now Fulton Houses is being looked at to demolish. If we think back to Cabrini, that's 20 years ago. That was the first warning sign that we had that something was wrong, right? 20 years after Cabrini was imploded, 50% of the tenants have not returned. Housing crisis in Chicago is out of control. Homelessness in Chicago is out of control. There is no affordable housing. And now they're all sitting there like, oh my God, what are we gonna do? That's what's gonna hit Fulton Houses next, right? So I'm seeing we have hands from Robert and then Thomas.
Yeah, I just wanted to say about, excuse me, Fulton Houses, that I was down there a few years ago doing some work, and we actually helped form an alternative tenant association, because the tenant association that was there was of course corrupt. So unfortunately it didn't last long, not last that long, but it was a step in the right direction, and that's when Jackie got activated to really, you know, push for that petition. And so it's a huge, you know, it's a huge network of activists that were down there, and at one point they were Norman Siegel was representing them.
The lawyer, yeah.
Lawyer.
I mean, and
yes.
listen to all of the work that went into that, right? Jackie fought so hard that it started affecting her health.
Yeah.
Like this, fighting this kind of stuff is slowly weakening many of us. This is exhausting, right? So this is why at the end of this teaching, we're going to talk about how do we get together? Because one tenant, one organization can't do this by itself. We have to do it in unity, right? So I'm going to go to Thomas, and then I'm going to go to Margaret, and then we'll get back to the following questions.
Okay, yes, good afternoon. My question about Fulton Houses, is it at the time that the Section 18 application was being considered, were they still considered Section 9?
So their application was for Section 18 hasn't started. Fulton Houses was originally transferred to RAD.
Oh, so they're already RAD.
So they went RAD. So
Because
they're
if
currently RAD.
from my understanding, if you're still Section 9 or public housing, when an application for demolition is being submitted or considered, then your 964 rights or regulations say you're supposed to be at the table.
Yes, that's true.
And if that doesn't happen, is there some legal recourse to make sure that you get at that table if you're still Section 9?
So if you're Section 9, right? So we're public housing.
Right.
Legally, you are supposed to be part of that conversation. But
Yeah,
that's not happening in practice, right? So one of the things that we are fighting for is to make sure that the amendment sets clear expectations, right? Because NYCHA and other housing authorities will tell you, like Minneapolis Housing Authority was like, that's where Greg Russ was before he came here. They're like, yeah, you know, everybody's participating, everybody's discussing it. And they'll have a meeting with 6 people. So out of like 700 tenants, 5 people will show up. And they're like, no, we had a meeting. Look, we had a meeting. Here's the meeting. Look at the picture. But 6 people don't represent 700, right? So with the trust, one of the things that the coalition member RPPH has done really well is they only want 20% of head of households to be necessary in order for the trust bill to go through. And we're all saying no. There has to be a minimum of at least 51. Because if 51% of tenants say we want to go private after we've educated them, after we've shared the information with them, then that is your choice to make. But if only 20% of your development is saying yes to something, that is not true democracy. And under Section 9, we have these rights. You know, America loves to go to other countries and talk about we're gonna teach them how to do democracy. But they don't do it domestically, right? So you have to be really clear. That's one of their favorite hobbies, right? So let's go to Margaret and then we'll get back to, we're going to talk a little bit about the next point.
Spoke to the president of Fulton Houses. I think they said that they're supposed to be going red. They signed the paperwork or about to, but they're supposed to be doing it this summer or something like that to get all the renovations. So this is my first time. I'm gonna look up some more, like you said, you know, because I know they were up for demolition a long time ago.
Yeah.
But like you're saying, like the Section 18, the young lady was saying, Section 18 doesn't have to be just for the trust. It's still there now.
Yes.
Anybody, if your building is condemned, is unlivable, you know? So, but I wanted to go back to your point about Washington. I did go to Washington with CBH one time. We all had our blue shirts on and we were, you know, doing our little silent protests. Like you said, I looked across the aisle and saw all those white shirts looking at us. And I'm like, you know, all the tenant advocate groups, not just CBH, go to Washington like once a year if they're lucky. These people live there.
Yeah.
They're there every day. So it's like they get their way, they get their money. So it's like, but right now it's like, does Section 9 have any money coming our way to save this? I know we're saving it, but it's like trying to save it anyway. Is there any money? Because all it is the money.
Yeah.
Because we almost got the money before with the Joe Manchin messed it up. But it's like we don't have the majority anymore. And this is when we had the majority by one. So it's like, what plans are we making now to get the money? Because even going to Washington, I was part of your Washington debriefing before. And like you said, people saw students, people saw the aides. They didn't even get a chance to see these, you know, these Congress people because they knew you were coming and they do this for a living. They wasn't even trying to hear Safe Section 9 or any of these people. You didn't even get a chance to even scratch the surface. So, but like right now, it's like, what plan is, you know, for money? Because I just don't want to see us dead in the water, whichever way it goes, you know? That's just like a hard pill to
Margaret, your
swallow.
point is like the perfect leeway to the conversation on what we actually can do, right? So now we've talked about the problem. We're all at this on the same page when it comes to recognizing that there are people that for a living are fighting for public housing to be privatized. So how do we stop that, right? So the money is a must. There's nothing that we can do without getting funding. If we don't get the money that we need, public housing is not going to be saved, right? So there's in the national solutions that I'm going to now share on the screen, I'm going to be showing you guys how we're working on the money and how we're working on our actual rights at the same time, right? So the national solutions are basically a set of demands that we wrote, but we had this really amazing volunteer who, you know, she made the argument that instead of talking about demands, we're going to talk about solutions. So we're going to go over those. Stop it, Brownie. He just woke up from a nap and he thinks it's playtime. No, you're doing too much. Jesus. Sorry, guys. So there's a couple of things that we are currently focused on, right? We're doing public housing solutions 1 and 2. So we were just in March down in DC. And you're absolutely right. We went down to the National Low Income Housing Coalition Conference. And there wasn't any talk about public housing, which I'm like, how are you talking about people that are low income and housing affordability and housing rights if you don't want to include public housing, right? The conversation doesn't make sense. But there were a lot of people at this conference that their focus is expanding affordable housing. But is affordable housing affordable? No, right? So we are taking a 2-pronged approach. The first one is stop it, Niño. The first approach is we are asking for these solutions to be turned into legislation. That's the key, right? So in the time that we are fighting for money and that we're trying to find ways to start streaming money towards public housing, we have to stop certain things from happening. So we need them to stop privatizing. So we're going to do that 2 ways. The first one is we're saying that HUD hasn't done a study on the impact of privatization on tenants and on communities. What they've done is a study on whether or not RAD brings in money. Well, duh, of course it brings in money. You're selling off our public housing for like 100 years, for like a lease that's worth $1. So yeah, you're making a ton of money that way. Private money is coming in, but they're not really paying attention to all the negative things that happen at the same time, right? So the rest of the solutions, there are different tenants that are interested in different pieces of it. So if you're interested in any of these, you can say, hey, you know, I want to be part of the group that talks about that and that works on that. So number 3 is talking about that section 18, right? Making sure that there's a real discussion with tenants, that tenants have a real chance to vote. Number 4, which I know is something that Brenda's interested in, is the national state of emergency for section 9, right? So there's specific money that's only available when a state of emergency is issued, right? So Sandy, the fires are happening in New Jersey right now. So those things open up money that can come in through different paths. And that's one issue that folks can get attached to, right? Then we want to make sure that there's actual tenant involvement in the public housing authorities that exist. Now for New York, we are requesting that there is a new housing authority. So remember, we're not trying to help NYCHA. We're trying to help public housing. So we've actually requested that a new housing authority be created for New York City. And that housing authority is actually going to be focusing on running public housing the way that it was run back in like 1960. So like 1950 to 1970. So we're going to have to make some modernization, right? So like wherever it said you need a computer, a typewriter, you need a computer. And that's something that tenants will be a part of. Now, talking about the money, we're looking for 100 billion. That 100 billion is for public housing across the United States. NYCHA keeps saying that they actually need 40 billion. But what's interesting to me is that that 40 billion doesn't change regardless of how many units they sell, right? They've been telling us for like 3 years, oh, we need 40 billion, we need 40 billion, we need 40 billion. But over the last 3 years, they have actually privatized like 60,000 units. But somehow that money doesn't change, right? So that's why we need a new public housing authority to start fresh. And we're putting in money not only for the capital repairs that are backlogged, but for the future of public housing. Then we're talking about the Faircloth Amendment. We remember in the video, it talks about the Faircloth Amendment putting a limit on how much public housing we need. Right now, we are nowhere near the limit. So tomorrow, when they start opening up those buildings in Midtown, remember how like the mayor in New York, I hate to be New York centric, but it's like a lot of stuff is happening here, right? So downtown New York, we have some buildings that are being turned into housing. That should be public housing. That is the perfect opportunity to expand public housing and to make it truly affordable. So we can do that. We can take on more public housing right now without having to fight the legislation. But at the same time, we want to make sure that the Fairclough Amendment is overturned. Then we talk about how we're going to use the money. We want public housing authorities to start using the money for things that are going to make sure public housing is with us for the next 100 years. So that's hiring better contractors. You know, right now, NYCHA has a list of preferred contractors. Not all of them are great. Not all of them hire our neighbors. Not all of them are accountable. So how do we do things better, right? Then we want to really fight through policy the racism, because we know that that's the assumption. Sometimes tenants will say things about our community that are racist and are inappropriate. So we need to change that within ourselves and also at the federal government. Then it's going to be going to, this is something that Christina's interested in, right? Like, how do we start using the fact that we pay our rent to build credit? Credit is like one of the smartest things that they ever made to screw people. But if you don't have it, there's certain things that you can't do, right? And for those of us that would need credit to achieve certain goals, our rent should be reporting for that, right? And then we actually want them to issue guidance on what affordable housing is. We believe that affordable housing caps your rent burden at 30% of your income. If you are paying anything above that, you can't afford to live where you live. And then we have cities, right? So the cities came up with their own list. Since we're New York centric tonight, I'm gonna go to New York, right? So in New York City, we've been able to work with the comptroller's office and the coalition, and there's some tenants here tonight that are part of the discussion on the forensic audit. That forensic piece hasn't happened yet, right? There's still questions about where is the money going? How is NYCHA still giving us the same deficit? Why are they lying now and saying that because tenants fell behind on their rent after the pandemic, they can't make repairs, right? Because they're always finding a way to put it on someone else. So we still need the forensic piece to be completed, but this is started. Here we talk about how do we create a new housing authority, right? So 1965 to 1970 are supposed to be like the great years for public housing. So we want to make sure that there's a bill that gives us the opportunity to create a new housing authority. Because NYCHA is going to be leaving and focusing on the trust, right? It's starting with 25,000 units, but they want to expand that. So when NYCHA leaves and starts focusing on private funding and making investors rich, who's going to take care of the rest of us? So this is the perfect time to create a housing authority that's going to do that, right? The new organizational plan does that. So this new organizational plan is going to be for the new housing authority, and it's going to make sure that the public housing tenants continue to get services. Now, we also have some demands for North Carolina, and these are always changing. So back to Margaret's question, right? I'm going to share the link for this with you guys in the chat. And this is something that folks can look at whenever they want, and you can ask questions about it. My Zoom is out of control. Let me copy the link so you guys can see that. And then I know Robert is monitoring the chat. And Teresa is also monitoring people raising hands, but back to, let me stop sharing. Back to that question, right? So like, how do we do this? How do we change the situation? We fight for the funding, right? So right now our primary partners in Congress are actually Republicans, which is something that surprises folks. It's not surprising me anymore because since we went down last June, we've been able to get more accomplished with Republicans than with Democrats. Democrats right now, when you go anywhere, right? Like they were Maxine Wright, Maxine Waters, and Marsha Fudge were at that conference in March. And they really focused their comments on telling people this is why you have to keep Democrats in office. Because look at all of the things that the Republicans are doing. And I was sitting there like, excuse me, ma'am, what are you doing? Right? What are you doing for our communities? So we have to make sure that we're holding both sides accountable and that we're talking to both sides. For the fall, we're preparing for a big event. It's going to be the National Day of Public Housing. During the National Day of Public Housing, we're going to be inviting tenants from across the country to join us. We're going to be announcing some of the legislation that we're working on now, right? So all of these different solutions are being turned into legislation and amendments. But the big question that Margaret asked about the money is the one that is going to be the hardest to work on. And I'm going to explain why. Right now, Congress will not pass a bill unless it's revenue neutral. So write that down, revenue neutral, and you guys can Google that. So revenue neutral means that they don't want to spend money that isn't being made. So we know that Republicans have a debt ceiling, and there's a lot of conversation on the news about this. Pay attention to that discussion. There's a debt ceiling. What do Republicans want to do with it? What comments are they making? How are Democrats responding? So some of the things that we're doing is we're working with some Republicans to look at how do we make sure that we're creating revenue for public housing, right? And some of the tenants that attend our meetings have given us some great ideas. I think one of the ones that's easiest is looking at marijuana sales. So we know our communities have endured imprisonment, and we're the victims of the war against drugs, and now everybody's selling weed. If you have legal marijuana sales, that should be feeding public housing, because public housing was the community that was most hurt by the criminalization of marijuana. So that's one of the arguments that we're going to be making. Another argument that we're going to be making is how do we bring revenue into existing infrastructure, right? So a couple of years ago, there was a really good article on, NYCHA was like, there's just no money. There's no money. They're always like, oh my God, I'm broke. But you have a bunch of spaces that you're not using. Huge spaces. How do we rent those spaces out? How do we turn that into supermarkets? How do we turn that into stores? How do we turn that into affordable, right? Rent? Like Rite Aid Pharmacy is closing down. They're shutting down because the rent is too high. So why can't NYCHA start leasing spaces at a more affordable price to companies that benefit our community? Like, I don't want us to have 27 McDonald's, but how do we bring in a Trader Joe's, right? Like, why can't I have a Trader Joe's in the South Bronx? Why did I just lose the only pharmacy in my community? The only chain pharmacy, right? So the things that you are seeing in your community are the little pieces and the nuggets that you can bring into our meetings every Wednesday. We meet at 7:30. And then you can start working with whichever team is interested in that solution. But that's the approach, right? One is, how do we create revenue? And number two is, how do we turn all of these solutions into bills? So that these bills then start reversing the trauma that public housing has endured. So do you guys have any questions on any of the pieces that I just shared? Okay, so let me go now.
I do.
Oh, go ahead.
Ramona,
Go ahead.
how many years do you think this is going to take?
That's a good question. It's a really good question. This is going to take time, right?
Okay.
So one of the things that I like to tell people is, when you start working on policy, the campaign timeline changes. right? Sometimes, you work on, like, I remember the first thing I did when I moved into Mitchell houses was, we didn't have trash cans outside of our buildings. So people would take their big bags down, put them in front of the building. And then that would create rats and that would create a mess.
Nice.
So I would walk my dog, right? That's when I got him. So 4 years ago, I start walking with him every day, and he really forced me to see the whole development. So I would be like, why is all this trash out here? And like, why is this not like getting picked up? So I started asking people, and people were like, well, the bags don't fit in the trash chute. Our compactors haven't been updated. That's why we've had so many fires, right? They're obsolete. So because the compactor isn't wide enough, folks are bringing their trash down to the front, and we need bigger trash cans. So every day I started taking pictures, and I was like, hey, every morning, all you would see was my dog, and I would post it to Instagram. And people would be like, oh, you're the trash girl. And I'd be like, that's not my name, but yes, I'm the trash girl. It took me like 6 months to continuously document this issue. And then I reached out to our council member and I said, listen, I'm done. Like, we need trash cans, and I need trash cans that are big. I need them to be tied to the front, and they need to have lids. So I stated my demand. And in 6 months, we got them. That was a quick campaign. So I was high. I was like, oh, I could do this. Let's go. What we taking on next? And then I took on the elevators, and they broke my heart, right? Like, the elevator funding, I got that 4 years ago, and they're just starting to replace them. So that was like a depression. I was like, I can't believe this was so difficult. But the trash was easy. The reason that this is going to be difficult is because there's no quick fix to this problem. In order to fix the condition of public housing, we have to deal with changing people's minds, with amending laws at the federal level, with creating a revenue stream, and with preparing tenants. So I'm saying it's going to take us at least 2 more years to be in a place where we have enough bills that have been passed. Well, you'll start seeing a change. And I know some people are not going to want to wait that long. I know some people are going to see a presentation on RAD, and they're going to be like, especially senior buildings. That's why they go to the senior buildings first. Bronx River Houses, their senior building was just Section 18, 6 months ago, 4 months ago? That's why they hit that first, because seniors are like, listen, I can't walk up 14 flights. I can't sit with a stove on every winter. So I know we're gonna lose public housing while this continues. I've come to peace with that. But one of the things that we're asking as part of the legislation is that not only does HUD have to do research, they also have to create a path, right? Where anybody that went to Section 8 project base can now be allowed back into Section 9. Because when you talk to folks at Ocean Bay, they want NYCHA. They're like, listen, it's so bad. I mean, you got pieces of your building flying in the wind. You might as well be in NYCHA and getting a discount on City Bike. And then anytime you get upset, you just jump on a bike for free and just go and work that stress off, right? Because that's a benefit we get as public housing tenants. So I don't tell people, listen, you can't go private. I give you the information so that you make that choice. And then I want to create the policies that you get an option to come back, right? So for the next 15 minutes, we're going to talk about what is it that we can do. So how do we start organizing ourselves, and what do we focus on in order to make this happen? The first thing is we educate. So education looks like a training like this. If 5 of you are interested in having us hold a teach-in at your development, at your community meeting, at your job, at your office, reach out. Drop your email. I'm going to be copying the notes at the end. Let us know who that is, right? So if 5 of you can right now could drop, I'm down. That means that you want me to come to your development with another volunteer, do this again, share this information, share the flyers, make sure that people know what's happening. The second option that we really want people to do or take is make sure that you do lobby training. Lobby training for us is, it's really easy. It's a 1-hour session, right? So shorter than this. And the main thing that we do when we lobby is we talk about why we love public housing. It's emotional, but it's beautiful. Because then when we lobby and we go speak to people in Congress, we're no longer talking about our shared problems, right? We're talking about why we're willing to continue to fight for public housing. You know, for me, public housing is the representation of my grandmother. A lot of you that have known me for a while know that grandma died from COVID, and she lived in this apartment for 32 years before passing away. And I struggle with the idea of leaving this apartment because this is where I feel her, right? I feel her spirit with me all the time in this house. And I don't want to lose that. You know, as someone who is unemployable because I can't hold a regular job, I can't afford to live anywhere else. I would be homeless if it weren't for public housing. So that's why I fight, right? So when I go into a meeting, that's who I am. That's what I share. And when I share that, it makes people believe that there should be a solution for this problem. So those are the two things that we want you to really think about. We're going to have a little discussion now, answer any questions that folks have left over. So we can log out by 9 o'clock. Because another thing we like to do is we want to make sure that we are watching and supporting folks from public housing. And I like to tell everybody, you know, Abbott Elementary, one of the writers for that show was raised in public housing. So after our meetings, I love to like decompress by laughing, right? So I'm seeing in the chat, I'm gonna go to Thomas next, but I'm seeing that Kimberly is down, Migdalia is down to host something. Danny is down to host something. Who else wants to host an event? A teach-in, we can do it virtual, we can do it in person. I see Brenda raising her hand. So that gives me 3 people, 4 people. I need 1 more person. I sound like the people in the Ponzi schemes, right? When you're signing up to like,
So
I need 1 more person.
If you can do it virtually,
Perfect. Thomas is our 5th. So who else is down to do a teaching? I need another teaching in New York City. I've got Queens. Who's in the Bronx and wants to, we've got Queens and Long
Staten
Island.
Island? Staten Island? Anybody? Anybody? Staten Island?
Someone from Brooklyn, someone from Manhattan, and someone from the Bronx. Don't let me down.
Queens?
And then Thomas, you can go ahead and share while we wait for 2 more developments.
okay, I just want to, I heard something recently, I think it was on Newsbreak, right? And I caught the end of it, but I did hear that the Republican dynamic is trying to reconcile some of the budget overruns, and they're targeting what they consider programs that don't generate any funds. One of the things that they want to do is take away the funding or limit the funding to, I think it was 2022 levels, right? Which would effectively take money out of the HUD budget for affordable housing. They're calling it affordable housing, but public housing would fall under that umbrella. I mean, have you heard anything to that effect?
So our Republican allies are telling us that anything that is non-revenue neutral is going to be very difficult to pass, right? So this is making me understand why, you know, Nydia Velasquez would always introduce bills trying to fund public housing, and those bills wouldn't move. So it would make tenants feel good, right? Because we'd be like, oh, look, Nydia's gonna, she's trying to get us this money. But it's never gonna happen. So I think the advantage that we have this time is that there is such a housing crisis now that truly is affecting red states, that they can't overlook the fact that the current system that they're pursuing it's not working. It's making things worse, right? So it's like, we can take advantage of the failure of RAD. And we can say it not only is it cheaper to operate public housing, but you maintain union employment.
But
And
I hear
believe
that it's
it or
up for a vote. I hear it's up for a vote coming up soon
that change.
about the allocation of funding to HUD.
Sorry, Thomas, Brownie is.
I'll try to do some more research on it, but that's basically what I, briefly what I heard, what I remember seeing in that article.
Yeah, so I know that they're starting to talk about what budget things they're not going to accept, and they don't want anything that costs money, right? So they're going to try to fight that. But if you remember from the State of the Union, remember when Biden said, there's some Republicans he said Republicans are trying to cut Social Security. And you remember how the Republicans were, no, it's just a few of us. Do you guys remember that? That was a really big deal the next day.
Yeah, no, I remember that.
So that's an example, right, of Republicans are conservative, but they're not crazy. They wanted to make it really clear that they are not the ones, that not all of them are in agreement with cutting these things. It's Pacific Republicans. So they don't want to really open up that kind of warmth because they can't hold their places. They're not going to keep their seats. Because regardless of whether or not you're a Republican or a Democrat, if you are a senior, you need your Social Security. Right? So I think this is an advantage that we have. And then the second advantage is they're really passionate about unions. Right? So when we talk about all of the jobs have left America, most of the jobs that we have now are coming from private companies. And unions still have a lot of power. So one of the things that the Republicans tell us is, well, yeah, what happens with the union folks? What happened to the union, the groundskeepers union, once you go private? You all get fired, you get transferred. So that's a huge loss of jobs. So Staten Island can't handle that, and neither can Long Island. So they're not gonna allow that to happen, right? But yeah, let's do more research on it. And then we'll keep talking to them in DC. And then I see, I see your hand, Danielette.
Danielle has her hand up.
Perfect, Danielette, and then Brenda.
Yeah, can I talk now?
Yeah.
Yeah, what I would like to see us do is look at the infrastructure of nature. It's a huge infrastructure with all these different departments. We want to know what every department is doing in contributing to the maintenance of housing, because that's where most of our funding is going. It is a massive infrastructure if you look at the chart. So
that's a really good point.
Yeah, so we should look at these different departments, see what their functions are and how they can help us.
Yes. So remember in the national solutions, we talk about a new organizational plan. That's why we put that in there. So let's look at that a little bit more, right? So the organizational plan is something that the Public Housing Authority has to update, right? Every so often, they have to say, these are the changes that we need to make to better run ourselves. Now, the last one was written in 2020. That one was written by Greg Russ. So that new organizational plan is actually focused on making sure that NYCHA is able to implement the trust. Let me repeat that. The 2020 NYCHA organizational plan was written to make sure that NYCHA can implement the trust. So what does that mean? That means that slowly NYCHA started moving employees from different positions, right? So if you used to focus on making sure that capital projects were being done, if you were part of engineering, right, and architecture and the things that NYCHA would do in those areas, you were let go or you were switched to something else. The units that got bigger with time are the units in charge of transporting, not transporting, privatizing.
And
public
real services.
and
Real estate.
services and the real estate office. Those are the three units that grew. So again, it's by design, right? They're making a conscious decision. And NYCHA has been operating for the last 2 years with that organizational plan. We all testified against it and they went ahead and did it anyway. And that organizational plan is basically taking money and taking staff away from the things that would make our quality of life better, or that would save money, and that would make public housing succeed. So that's why we need a new one. So you're hitting it right on the nail. So then I'm gonna go to Brenda, and then I see Margaret raised her hand as well.
Okay, so I just a lot of information. Thank you. Okay, I want to just go back for you to elaborate a little bit on RAD impact. I'm hearing from Ocean Bay that, of course, there have been a lot of evictions and a lot of people's rents have gone up. Help me to explain to people, when I'm talking about RAD, how their rents would go up, because people keep saying, no, it's 30% of my income. It's 30% of my income and that's all I'm paying and that's the way it is. When we do know that there is something happening where your rent will go up over 30%. And is that when they take away the Section 8 if you make over that threshold for Section 8? Can you explain that a little bit so that we can understand a little bit better, and I can explain it, so that there's no question?
That's a great question. So how is that they raise the rents, right? So there's folks that are doing research to figure that out, like how is that being done in New York? And I know that the comptroller, when they're looking at the eviction rates, they're also looking at that piece of it, right? Like that is a huge piece of people getting evicted. If your rent goes above your capacity, you start falling behind. So in New York, we're trying to figure it out, but this is what we've seen in other cities. In other cities, the housing authority will come in, and what they'll do is, once you go to this new management company, you'll start seeing new charges. So they introduce these charges as amenities. And these amenities include plumbing, heating, hot water. And they're putting them in as an amenity because they're repairing the pipes, or they're repairing the system for the boiler. So instead of saying this is something that I should be paying for, right? Because this is something that people are supposed to get as part of their rent, the new private companies are like, okay, well, we're going to charge you because we had to come in and replace your bathtub. But if you had molds in your bathroom for the last 15 years, why do you have to pay a $200 surcharge for 6 months to cover that? That's how they're doing it in Minneapolis, right? So we've seen that for sure. If we know like our pipes are in a horrible condition and need to be replaced, why am I going to start getting charged $50 a month on top of my base rent? So the rents for your apartment might not change, but these fees are starting to get added on and they become impossible. And slowly people in Minneapolis are like, I can't pay my rent, right?
Okay. Yeah. So I know of one woman, she got a job through Section 3, right? She lives in Ocean Bay, got a job through Section 3. And I mean, I'm just gonna give you an example. Her rent was maybe $200 because she was under Section 8, right? Huh?
She was under Section 9 and she got a job with Section 3.
Okay, so now what I'm saying is that she lives in Ocean Bay, which is under RAD. Her rent was $200 under RAD. When she got the job, she made over what Section 8, what she would be eligible to continue to receive Section 8 under RAD. So they snatched her Section 8 from her. And now she's not paying 30% of her income.
Yeah.
Is that because Section 8 is not helping so that her rent goes up to whatever market rate or whatever they're providing? She's not getting the help from Section 8. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
So can you explain that, how that goes? Is that real, or is it should she still be paying 30% even though she makes over what Section 8 is eligible for her? I'm trying to get.
So in order to qualify for a program like Section 8, you have to make below a certain income, right? You have to have a financial need. Section 8 is a program like food stamps where there has to be a need. There's brackets of money that you can make and not make. So it sounds like with her, because she started earning money, which is great, right? Section 3 provides us employment and it prioritizes people in public housing for employment. So once she started making above that, what happened was she became ineligible for the Section 8 subsidy. So now her rent, she's paying for the full amount.
She doesn't pay the 30% anymore. And that's the thing. So guess what she did? She quit her job.
Yeah. Now, what happens if you're living in public housing? We have many tenants in our developments right here at Mitchell. I know that we have 6 people that are making above $100,000. They pay 30% of their rent, right? They put 30% of their income in the pocket that is for our rent. And in Mitchell houses, we pay $1 million per building in rent every month. We have 10 buildings. So I'm only putting $78 because I'm like below, it's not even a poverty line anymore. But there's some people that have grown up in public housing. And like me, at one point I was making 100 grand. Right? So public housing is mixed income. Section 8 is not mixed income. That's a point that we make to Republican officials. We let them know Section 8 is not mixed income. Affordable housing is not mixed, right? Public housing allows you to get the education, to start working, and to continue to pay your fair share. So I'm gonna pass it on to Margaret, and then we're gonna start closing because I know I've had you for a long time.
Yeah, I'm kind of a little bit unsettled with the Republican, with the money part.
Yeah.
Because these people that they made us NYCHA suffer so they could put money in their rich friends' pockets,
Yes,
including Red Cross. So how is it now that we're gonna come up with a program that's not gonna be putting money in these people's pockets?
Yeah, that's,
You know, because
that's a difficult thing to deal with.
Because it's like that, it's like, you know, if they talking to me to my face and telling me, don't worry, that's what they're gonna do. But their whole track record with the tax break that came and with all the programs with the welfare that I told you was to literally the shelter to put money in the pockets of the rich people.
Yeah.
So now you're coming up with a new legislation that's not gonna put money that in these people's pockets, and they're gonna be like, oh yeah, we're not gonna get any money. My friend is not gonna get any money. Let's go with it.
So I struggle with that a lot. And some of the members of the coalition don't have the best opinions or, history with Republicans because they do make some policy choices that are not for the betterment of all, right? But because the Democrats continue to fail us, they're the ones that are actually honoring our solutions and working on writing legislation that we need, right? So to me, if tenants continue to do these steps, right? You get educated and you educate others and you negotiate. You guys are in the meeting with the Congress people, right? You design these things. But that goes back to your question of how long is this going to take? You know, if Christina's really passionate about credit scores, that's a heavy lift. That's Christina and whoever else wants to work on that project coming together and saying, look, we're going to focus on this issue. And focusing on that issue and understanding that for like at least 2 years, you're going to focus on that issue. And at the end of those 2 years, you'll have this legislation and you'll have that change. So it is a heavy lift to go in and say, we're going to now be writing programming and we're going to be writing legislation in a way that doesn't benefit your private friends anymore, that doesn't benefit your donors. But I think we have some arguments that they can't keep ignoring. The housing crisis in Staten Island is out of control. And that's a Republican. Long Island, starting to get to that problem, right? And they're also seeing how cities, right, how the 5 boroughs are starting to flex out because we don't fit anymore. We can't find places to live. People used to move to the Bronx because the Bronx was cheap. My 1-bedrooms in this area are going for $2,500. So, you know, for us, we do not endorse politicians. We're honest with you guys. Like Meeks is a problem. If you have Congressman Meeks as your congressperson, you've got a problem.
Mhm.
He is a real issue. He will not take a meeting with us. They'll talk to you about St. Patrick's Day, but they won't talk about public housing. As his constituents, it is on you to create the opening for us to come in and do what we do. Because they won't see us because, oh, well, who the hell are you and you don't live in my district, right? So I think it's this process of like understanding if we continue to be rooted in our values, right? And our values are housing is a human right, and housing should be affordable, and housing should be dignified, regardless of your income.
Mhm.
And if we stick to those and we write policy and we work on programming that honors that, then it doesn't matter who our partners are, because I'm not selling out. I don't get paid for this. So I can't be paid. I can't be bought off, right? A lot of resident association presidents have been bought off. Like, do you know what the going rate is for a development? So if a RAD company comes in and they do the presentation, right? They come into your development, they talk to the resident association, they'll offer the resident association a certain amount of money. And there are tenant association presidents that have taken this money, and we know from them that they've taken it. The going rate in Manhattan is $25,000. They're selling out thousands of families for $20,000.
That ain't no money.
20 to 25.
That is absolutely no money at
No
all.
In the
honey,
That
South
is, that is
Bronx,
absolutely
That's chicken
ridiculous.
change.
And
you
And-
think that's bad? You know how much they're
No.
paying off in the Bronx? 15.
come on.
Oh,
So I
greedy.
You're
always tell
selling your neighbor
people,
for 15K? Fuck outta
15,000.
here.
I tell people, if your tenant association president has put you through the RAD process and starts talking about I'm moving, you were sold.
I don't know where they're moving with 15K or 25K.
Not for long.
Because
Where they
even I mean,
going?
Thomas moved down to North Carolina. And you can't get nothing in North Carolina for $15,000, right? And Kimberly, yes, it's the presidents, right? The presidents and the board members will be in private conversations with these management companies. And in these private conversations, money is being exchanged. How do they do it? They do it by issuing what's called consulting fees,
That's no money.
right? Because they're not the mob. So they can't just hand you over $15,000. So they use the system.
Questionable.
You know, they use the system. But this is the same way that the mob is run.
Mhm.
So we are losing our homes. We're being evicted. We're being displaced for $15,000 to $25,000 when this land is worth millions. I'm at the riverfront in the South Bronx where they're bringing in every Becky and every Bob. My development is worth millions. This land is priceless. Fulton houses, priceless. And that's what it's about, right? So on that note, I want to thank all of you for staying till 9 o'clock. I hope you found something, that moved you to return. We're here every Wednesday at 7:30. We're on Facebook, Safe Section 9, the number 9. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram. Ashley will be taking all of the emails. Please share this information with your neighbors. If I never see you again and you can tell 2 people, listen, this is what I just found out. Just tell those 2 people. That's enough. So I'm grateful to all of you, to the folks that supported with the teaching, and to our ancestors. Because I like to think that this fight is timed, right? People have been fighting for public housing for a long time, but we haven't been doing the things that we're currently doing, right? We haven't been writing the policies. We haven't been talking about budgeting. And now we are. And I have to believe that I tell myself that I had to become disabled with this skill set so that I could help my community get what they deserve. So for that, I'm humbled, and I hope you guys enjoyed it.
And thank you, that was informative. I enjoyed it too.
Thank you.
Thank you, I'll be back next.
It was a good meeting.
Good night, everybody.